That very day, this is from the 24th chapter of Luke. That very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation which you were holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" He said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since this happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find the body, and they came back saying that they had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." I think that's good enough to be going on with. As I said, this year Easter actually seems like Easter. And that might be because we've had 13 months of Good Friday. We are all dealing with the big ongoing situation. We certainly haven't had this many people gone from us at one time, at least for 100 years, and maybe not since 1865. And it's difficult. And we have to remember to quote from Martin Bell again, "The Way of the Wolf." This is from a funeral sermon apparently that he gave. "Human beings do not own one another. We are God's children. We belong to him. It is by sheer grace that we are together for a time, for a little while. We receive God's gift of another person in our lives with thanksgiving, but we must realize that this person is a gift. We cannot hang on or refuse to let go of one of God's children when he calls." The Easter message is one of the two biggies. It's one of the most difficult ones to do every year, partly because even somebody as young as Sage or Ollie has heard all the details a number of times by now. And there are only so many permutations you can do. I mean, you could do the historical thing, because the ones who are better read among you will realize that the earliest version of the story we have is not in the Gospels at all. It's in 1 Corinthians, which was written 15 to 20 years beforehand. Or you could take one of the gospel accounts. You could do the history thing. You could do the what did they really see or not see or think they saw. You can do all of that. I think what I'm going to do is to tell you a story. Or at least enough of a story that when you are ready, or in a couple of cases old enough to watch for yourselves, you'll have some background in it. How many of you have seen the movie Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close? That's a hard, that's a hard one, isn't it, David?
Yeah, I actually read the book.
Oh, okay.
But it was hard enough.
That was hard enough to do.
I have seen the movie.
Okay.
I'm sorry to be talking so much.
Well, that's all right.
I have seen the movie.
All of the grown-ups will recognize Tom Hanks and Sandra Bullock, and they have a kid who's about, say, in the age range of Sage and Ollie. The son's name is Oscar, and the father's mother they live in New York City in a high-rise, and the father's mother lives across the busy street in front of their high-rise.
On the same floor.
Yeah, and on the same floor, so Oscar can look across and send messages to his grandmother, which is very nice for them. Well, one morning, and the adults will probably have figured out what morning that is. Oscar. You must have been thinking about me, kid. Oscar has no more than just got to school than he's sent home. And it takes a long while to get home. And the morning is, of course, 9/11. And Oscar has been very fond of his father. See, Oscar is probably somewhere at the lighter end of the autism spectrum. And he has trouble reaching out to other people. And his father has been taking him on little excursions, little scavenger hunts to help him learn to relate to other people better. And part of the exercise is that he has to go and talk to all these strangers he's never met. So they're strangers to him. And find out information for whatever the project is. Well, unfortunately, Oscar's father is in one of the towers and doesn't get out. See, that's why I said some of you might not be old enough to watch this yet. And of course, the consequences are devastating, like you would expect. And then you go, so the story basically opens up again some months later, and Oscar finds a key in a little manila type envelope about so big, and it's a safety deposit box key, he finds out. And it has a single word on the envelope, black, which he, with a little elementary sleuthing, he figures out is probably a last name. So whether from his need or just the human tendency to connect the dots, even when the dots weren't originally meant to be connected, he conceives his father's last scavenger hunt for him, which is to find the person to whom the key belonged and return it. And I mean, he's very inventive. I mean, he gets hold of the entire New York City phone book and gets the names of every person whose last name is Black in the 5 boroughs, and determines to visit every one of them. And eventually he does succeed. But that's not really all the point. I mean, it's sort of like the Star Trek Voyager episode where Captain Janeway convinces herself that she needs to essentially go on a vision quest to save the life of one of her crewmates. And so she goes through all these elaborate preconditions and then ordeals. I mean, holding stones out at arm's length until she can't anymore. And because she knows that there's a story in this culture about a king whose son was similarly struck down, and the king went through the purification ritual that the monks at this shrine went through, and went and asked the ancestral spirits who were worshipped at this, or who were honored at this shrine, to save his son, and the son recovers. So she figures, okay, we can do this. And this is something a good person of science can do. So she goes through all of this. She doesn't recognize that these 3 older people who at the very outset, while she's waiting to begin her adventure, just want her to sit and chat. She doesn't recognize that her quest could have ended right there. She goes through all of these things only to be told in the end that it was meaningless. Because the symbol itself means less than the reality that the symbol stands for. I mean, Quakers have always known this. That's why we didn't celebrate Christmas for so long, or Easter, because every day is Easter. Every day is Christmas, every day is Easter, if you are in the same spirit as gave forth the scriptures. And she goes through all of this, and it's meaningless. Well, young Oscar's quest, turns out his father didn't set it up for him. It was just a piece of unfinished business that his dad never got to take care of. But what we find out along the way is that Oscar needed to go on the journey. And we also find out that instead of being something set up by his father, he's been hiding all of this activity from his mother, which is no small feat for even an adult, let alone a school child. And he finds out that the mother had figured out what he was doing, got ahead of him on his list, and went and prepared the way for him. Sort of the way in many theologies, God goes ahead of us to prepare our way, even though we may not recognize it at the time. The Spirit, it's called prevenient grace, if you want the $10 term for it. The Spirit goes before us. The Spirit prays for us with groans that are too deep for words. Oscar's grandmother helps him Oscar's grandmother has this mysterious lodger who turns out to be her estranged husband. So it's Oscar's father's father. And there was family trouble in the background. And the grandfather will not speak. He will only communicate by writing on a pad, which is very interesting, especially theologically. And at the end, Oscar finds out that he manages to return the key. He finds out that it wasn't meant for him to begin with, that it was just a piece of unfinished business on his father's part. And then his mother comes clean and tells him what she's been doing, because he has suddenly lost his guiding purpose, and this thing goes on for more than a year. And he doesn't know what to do. And he's a bit distraught at this. And we find out that Oscar's mother has been preparing the way for him. And it's sort of like how in the Easter story, Christ had to go away in order for us to receive the Holy Spirit, and to experience God in another way. And that's sort of like where we find ourselves now. What could be a very sad story is actually a triumphant story, because now we know how it comes out. Now we can see hope. Hope is the one thing that Viktor Frankl says that human beings cannot live without. I mean, aside from the physical elements, hope people can't live without. And it can't be the easy sort of hope that, the Cinderella sort of hope that Prince Charming will come along and make everything all right. It has to be the sort of hope where you see yourself getting through a situation and being all right. Paul says that the hope Christians have does not disappoint. How many of you know the story of Pandora's box? Or originally it was a jar, but Pandora's box? What was the very worst evil, according to the myth, that was still trapped inside when everything else got out? Hope. But it was that Cinderella, but they meant that Cinderella sort of hope, that somebody would come along and make it all better. Because hope to a Greek at that time was sort of ambivalent. They knew the Cinderella phony kind of hope all too well. And that's why Paul, writing as a Jew, said that hope, which is the sort of hope that you'll get through it, does not disappoint, and that Jesus is our hope. Paul said a lot of things. Not all of them 100% good, and other people said things in Paul's name, most of which were not good. But hope is what we're left with. So on this Easter, look to hope. Look to getting through. Look forward to a time maybe when we don't all have to wear these all the time. when we can start hugging each other again, when we can shake hands, maybe. Don't give up hope, and don't give up the struggle.